The point of William Burroughs is that you can't go back. Everything that happens is in some irrevocably palpable sense indelible and inerasable. Everything that happens leaves its mark, because to be is to erupt, to push apart a fabric with hammer-cleft pincers. Each moment is the expression of an arrangement, not as an abstract synthesis of parts in an aesthetic whole, but a chimeric image of what Joyce calls in Finnegan's Wake a warping process, destabilizing the notion of totality or the possibility of formally segregated, abstract being. This process is always an intermingling matter that constantly undulates, perforates, and ruptures. This is enacted in the cosmic language of viscerality, so characteristic of Burroughs' prose. When it feels too much, that's because we're not accustomed to literary representations that demand to be felt because they speak of and by the felt. Their language is haptic, effluvious, abrupt yet liminal, an attempt to mark existence as a positive moment without duration, as Gilles Deleuze puts it. That is, a moment in time and thus temporally situated and occurring, but without a formal barometer for quantifying or encoding it into discrete arrangements. This moment as assemblage resists discrete procedures of knowing, reckoning, discrimination, or judgment, and thus resists the naming process itself. This being the foremost thrust of Burroughs' aesthetic practice, it becomes all the more obvious the predicament he is in. All of this is done for him through the medium of language. Words, words, words. A system which Burroughs often declares is the most enduring framework for systematization, hierarchization, and discretization humanity has ever had. All the more pressing, language has been mistakenly viewed as a rational prosthesis to human cognition and experience that we own because we made it. For Burroughs, however, it is questioned whether it is not rather the case that we are owned by language, precisely because we feel so compelled to make it, constantly. To incessantly reproduce is the imperative of language, as it does not serve its function outside of the be fruitful and multiply imperative, creating webs of words interconnecting human communities through shared linguistic beliefs and acts, only after the fact accreting a history of norms and institutions that might justify its signifying value. This imperative, Burroughs astutely notes, is the exact same imperative as the virus as well as the parasite. Burroughs sees viral logic as a biological logic deeply sympathetic to human cognition, and one that human cognition has evolved mutually intertwined with, such that humans are, in some inextricable sense, viruses, if not in themselves, then at the very least as an acquired gestalt over time. In the master signifier of the virus, Burroughs sees an insidious master narrative that has co-opted the planet, perhaps existence itself, and which can help explain the whole gamut of human behavior, from love to war to consumption to addiction to art to death. Viewed as a structure for the propagation of patterns Burroughs calls routines, language is a virus that interfaces with and co-opts biological bodies. This contagious logic is commonly personified in Burroughs' writings as the ugly spirit or the other half, which is defined succinctly by Burroughs when he says, "Every man has inside himself a parasitic being who is acting not at all to his advantage." This otherworldly, haunting force of control and vehicular invasion is constantly being repelled by Burroughs in his writing, likely as both a genuine artistic attempt and a schizophrenic adjacent paranoia. At once human and inhuman, Burroughs remains continually haunted by something else, and the figure of the animal, be it the mugwump, the insect, the shark, the cat, or the lemur, often serve as a vehicle for his exploration of the otherness within. Consider this entry from The Cat Inside. Thinking back to early adolescence, I recall a recurrent sensation of cuddling some creature against my chest. It is quite small, about the size of a cat. It is not a human baby, and it is not an animal. Not exactly. It is part human and part something else. I can recall an occasion in the house at Price Road. I must be 12 or 13. I wonder what it is. A squirrel? Not quite. I can't see it clearly. I don't know what it needs. I do know that it trusts me completely. Much later, I was to learn that I am cast in the role of the guardian, to create and nurture a creature that is part cat, part human, and part something as yet unimaginable, which might result from a union that has not taken place for millions of years. This paranoid pretension, we see with the repeat of something else, is not uncommon in the aesthetic circles of the time, as well as those of previous generations influential upon Burroughs, such as Rimbaud and Céline. Consider how the founder of Surrealism, André Breton, opens his novel Nadia on a note rather sympathetic to Burroughs' suspicions of possession. Who am I? If for once I were to fall back on a proverb, then why shouldn't everything come down to knowing whom I haunt? In Burroughs' writing, this hauntedness by the other, as well as the haunting of the other we convince ourselves is selfhood, is constantly present as a reminder of humanity's duplicitous existence in a world at once fashioned to be tolerable to us, and at the same time inescapably other. Hence, the frequent exploration of interfacing with non-human animals in an attempt to map the outer peripheries of existence and experience, as well as the enduring dynamics of our lurking, quotidian mundanity. They got this awful mollusk eats the hanged boy's body and soul in the orgasm, and they love being eaten because of this liquefying gook it secretes and rubs all over them. To clarify, Burroughs is not claiming there's something a priori necessary in all this. He's not a believer in any divinely secured justice or teleology, after all. He's profoundly skeptical of there needing to be any ultimate reason behind any of this. If there were, one would have cause for indignation, just actions, or worship. But without any divinity in which to seek shelter, one is to face the onslaught in a wild, reckless, comedic, and excessive way, since we are forced to make use of all the drama, narrative, power, and play we have at our disposal to help make things interesting. Burroughs decides to do this living with words, stumbling into this vocation in a drug-induced stupor after wandering rather aimlessly through his 30s and early 40s in search of a vocation, and stumbling instead upon drugs in New York City. In words, Burroughs saw humanity's deepest flaws seeping through myriad cracks. In between words, and within each one itself, Burroughs saw potential, valence, an electric charge crackling with intensity and simmering with disruptive potential. Through the power of literature as a tool of embodiment, Burroughs poured his fantasies, desires, preoccupations, anxieties, figures, arrangements, and routines, seeking to embody the dynamism of mobile art. By mobile art, I mean any and all art that emphasizes movement, process, and duration. This could be film, music, performance art, and a number of emergent art forms that Burroughs pioneered throughout his life, such as cut-up literature and films, shotgun paintings, and a unique capacity for artistic collaborations across genres and media, eschewing any single school of thought but diving deeply into many, including Scientology, the philosophies of Wilhelm Reich and Alfred Korzybski, and what would come to be known as the Beats. Yet Burroughs doesn't quite fit in with the beats. Older than most, he belongs to a silent generation before the silent generation, wherein American culture, industry, and ideology quickly came to the forefront of the world as Europe became strained by 2 world wars and crumbling colonial hegemony outside Europe. As the old world waned, suffering immense war casualties and crippling damage to all the Enlightenment rationality stood for, the New World rose quickly as the new global superpower, and with it came the logic of neo-capitalist consumer culture. Another virus, just in slightly updated garbs. With the advent of the new global order, a new East-West schism formed between Western American consumer capitalism and Eastern Soviet communism. During the Cold War, these 2 axes served as conditions for a new American ideology of consumer capitalism facilitated by new technological advancements, such as international communications technologies like TVs, news, and advertisements. All of this amidst the backdrop of the looming threat of nuclear war, and we see the extent to which Burroughs' world feels as one primed to explode, and hence Burroughs' continual insistence that, as his famous collaboration with artist Brian Geisen puts it, there are minutes to go. A backdrop of unprecedented potential for destruction by modern weapons, juxtaposed with an insistence on pleasure and consumption from corporations, and Burroughs saw a society on its last legs, desperately struggling with its own contradictions, with a parasitic logic pulling it to its knees and humans hopelessly barreling toward that moment. No longer could the idea of society as a coherent whole be tolerated. In this disintegration lies the prescience of and conditions for a new apocalypticism colored by absurdist aesthetic sensibilities. Violence has become so commonplace, not only in war, but in our daily lives, where images and processes of violence constantly impinge upon our daily lives, begging us to enter a pool of pleasure crowded with interests ceaselessly at odds with each other. Instead of hoping for a cease to strife, Burroughs' writing incisively examines this ripeness for violence that characterizes our contemporary world, amplifying it and, in the process, satirizing it. With the precision of a surgeon, the biting tone of a zealot, the skepticism of an iconoclast, and the levity of a comic, Burroughs' writings present a new vitality to life, offering up to life an aesthetic alternative that does not harmonize with any existent order, but rather projects a world to be, one of the deeply queer aspects of his oeuvre. Accessing new registers of experience, new juxtapositions, a common cut-up phrase of Burroughs', Burroughs provides tools, techniques, and visions for reimagining the present world and its future possibilities, presenting human and non-human experience in as of yet uncharted ways that we'd be lying to say we fully understand or can entirely ignore. It is work, as T.S. Eliot says of Joyce's Ulysses, to which we are all indebted and from which none of us can escape, and, as one unmistakably feels with Burroughs, from which one cannot return.